The moment she stepped past the high table, every guard in the coronation hall reached for their weapon at the same time. I felt it before I understood it. A ripple through the crowd, 41 delegations rising half out of their seats, security officers from a dozen empires suddenly tense and alert, hands hovering over sidearms that were never supposed to be drawn inside a peace summit. Princess Salith Corvinte Dune, heir to the Kelvari dominion, was walking away from her own throne, and nobody in that hall knew what that meant. In a room full of rulers who lived and died by protocol, an unscripted moment was more dangerous than an armed one. My name is Daniel Hartley. I was the only human in that hall, sitting in the last row reserved for what the other empires politely called observer species, which really just meant the ones too small to matter. I had no idea, when I sat down that morning, that within the hour I would be at the center of an assassination attempt against the most powerful heir in known space. Salith walked straight past the golden chair with her name engraved on it. She walked past the Threll Emperor, who half rose in shock. She walked past war admirals whose fleets could erase entire moons. She kept walking until she reached the back of the hall, past the section nobody important ever visited, and sat down in the empty seat beside me like it was the only seat in the universe that mattered. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes right before something breaks. "Your Highness," the Master of Ceremonies said, his voice tight, "this is a security breach. You cannot leave the protected zone." "I am aware," Salith said, not looking at him. "I am choosing to sit here anyway." That was when the lights along the east wall flickered. I noticed it because I had spent 3 years flying survey routes through unstable systems, and you learn to notice power fluctuations the way a sailor notices a change in wind. A flicker like that, in a hall wired with redundant shielded power lines, was not an accident. I turned my head just enough to see a maintenance panel near the east balcony hanging open, its access light blinking red instead of green. Someone had been in that panel who was not supposed to be there. I did not have time to explain any of this. I grabbed Salith's arm and pulled her down below the level of the table just as the first shot came from the balcony, a bright lance of energy that tore through the space where her head had been half a second earlier and struck the golden chair with her name on it, melting the engraved letters into slag. The hall exploded into chaos. Delegates screamed and dove for cover. Security teams from a dozen empires opened fire on the balcony without knowing what they were shooting at. Salith's own guards, stationed near the empty throne she had refused to sit in, were 15 meters away and boxed in by panicking crowds, unable to reach her. "Stay down," I said, dragging her behind an overturned table. "You do not give me orders," she snapped, though she stayed down anyway. "Then stay down because you want to live," I said. "Same result." Another shot cracked overhead. I risked a glance around the table edge and saw the shooter clearly for the first time, a lean figure in dark Kelvari fatigues, no insignia, moving with the kind of precision that only came from military training. Not a lone fanatic, not a random extremist. This was planned, and it was planned by someone who knew exactly where Salith was supposed to be sitting. Which meant someone had known she would break protocol before she did it. Or someone had planned to kill her regardless of where she sat, and her choice to sit beside me had accidentally saved her life by moving her out of the expected kill zone. I filed that thought away because there was no time to examine it. The shooter was moving along the balcony rail toward a better angle, and Salith's guards were still too far to help. "There's a service corridor behind the east curtain," I said. "I saw the staff use it earlier to bring in refreshments. It leads out of the main hall." "How do you know that?" "Because unlike everyone else in this room, I actually paid attention to something other than rank," I said. "Move." We moved low, using the overturned tables as cover, while security fire from 3 different empires crisscrossed above us. I kept one hand on Salith's shoulder, not because she needed guiding, but because in chaos like this, contact matters. It keeps people from freezing. It keeps people from panicking apart from each other. We reached the curtain just as a second shot came, closer this time, close enough that I felt the heat of it pass my ear. I shoved Salith through the gap in the curtain and followed her into the narrow service corridor beyond, my heart slamming against my ribs. The corridor was dim, lit by strips of pale emergency lighting along the floor. Somewhere behind us, the sounds of the hall were muffled but still frantic, shouting voices layered over the sharp crack of energy weapons. Whoever that is, they knew this summit's layout, I said, catching my breath. They knew where the good sightlines were. That takes weeks of planning, not hours. You think this was arranged from within my own court, Salith said. It wasn't a question. Her voice had gone flat and cold, the voice of someone doing rapid calculations behind a mask of calm. I think someone wanted you dead before you could be crowned, I said, and I think they expected you to be sitting in the chair with your name on it. Salith was quiet for a moment, staring down the dim corridor. When she spoke again, her voice had an edge I hadn't heard from her before, something sharper than fear, something closer to fury held tightly in check. There is one person who benefits most from my death tonight, she said. My cousin, Regent Vantor. He has ruled as steward since my father died. A coronation ends his power. A death before the coronation extends it indefinitely, until a new heir is found, which conveniently takes years to arrange, and which he conveniently controls. Then he's probably the one who planned this, I said, which means he might have people already stationed in this corridor, expecting you to run this way if the first shot missed. Salith's eyes flicked to me, something like respect crossing her face for just a second. You think fast for someone with no formal military training. I think fast because I want to keep breathing, I said. Come on. We moved deeper into the corridor, away from the noise of the hall, following the pale emergency lights toward what I hoped was an exit. The corridor branched twice, and both times I picked the path that sloped downward, toward what should have been the lower service levels and eventually an exit onto the palace grounds. We were 3 turns in when a figure stepped out of a side passage ahead of us, blocking the only way forward. Not the shooter from the balcony. Someone else, tall, dressed in the deep violet robes of a Kael'vari court official, hands clasped in front of him with a calm that did not belong in a corridor full of gunfire and panic. Cousin, the man said, and I realized with a cold drop in my stomach that we were looking at Regent Vantor himself. You should have stayed in your seat. You planned this, Salith said, not a question this time either, a statement cold as ice. I protected the Dominion, Vantor said. You have spent 4 months since your rescue speaking of humans as though they represent some enlightenment my own people lack. You would have crowned yourself tonight and begun dismantling the alliances I built to keep our borders safe, all because a human bandaged your leg and asked for nothing in return. Sentiment is not policy, Salith. It never has been. And murder is, Salith said. Necessity is, Vantor said, and his hand moved toward something hidden in his robes. I did not wait to see what it was. I had spent enough years running survey missions through pirate-infested systems to know that the half-second between a threat reaching for something and that something being drawn is the only half-second you get. I shoved Salith sideways into the wall, out of the direct line, and threw myself at Vantor before his hand cleared his robe. We went down together, and whatever weapon he had been reaching for skittered across the floor, spinning into the shadows beyond the reach of the emergency lighting. Vantor was stronger than his slender frame suggested, and for a few brutal seconds we grappled on the corridor floor, his hands closing around my wrist as I fought to keep his other arm pinned. Then Salith was there, pressing something cold and metallic against the side of Vantor's neck. A tool from the maintenance corridor, a length of pipe or a fallen piece of equipment, I never actually found out which. What mattered was that Vantor went still. Call off whoever else you have stationed in this palace, Salith said, her voice shaking now, not with fear but with the effort of holding back something much larger. "Call them off, or I will finish what my father's illness started and leave nothing of your regency but a name in a history no one reads." For a long moment nobody moved. Then, somewhere in the depths of the corridor, footsteps approached, fast and heavy, and I tensed, ready for another fight. But it was Salith's own guards, finally breaking through the chaos of the hall, weapons raised, faces grim. Vantor was taken into custody within the hour. His shooter was found on the balcony, already trying to slip away through a maintenance shaft, and gave up the moment he was surrounded, offering Vantor's name before anyone had even asked a question. By the time the hall was cleared of debris and the delegates coaxed back to something resembling order, the sun outside the palace windows had begun to set, painting the crystal pillars in shades of gold and rose. The coronation, delayed but not cancelled, resumed 2 hours later, this time with security triple what it had been that morning, and with Vantor's seat among the court officials standing conspicuously, permanently empty. I stood near the back of the hall again, in my usual place among the observer delegations, my hands still slightly unsteady from the adrenaline of the corridor. I expected the night to end there, quietly, with me returning to my seat and watching from a distance as Salith took her crown. Instead, when the ceremony began, and the presiding elder called for the heir to come forward and claim her throne, Salith walked to the dais, faced the assembled delegations of 41 empires, and did not sit in the golden chair that had been repaired and reset in her name. She turned instead and looked directly at me. "Tonight I was nearly killed by my own blood, for the crime of valuing kindness over calculation," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, translated instantly into 41 languages by the summit's interpreters. "I was saved not by the armies my family has spent centuries building, not by the alliances my court negotiated for decades, but by a man from a species most of you consider too small to matter, who acted without asking what he would gain." A murmur went through the crowd, the kind of low, uncertain sound that rulers make when they sense a shift they cannot yet name. "For generations, this hall has decided worth by bloodline and by fleet size," Salith continued. "Tonight I decide differently. I will take my throne because my people need a ruler, and I will not abandon them to men like my cousin. But I will not forget which seat truly earned my trust, and I will not let this summit forget it either." She gestured, and to my astonishment, palace attendants moved a second chair onto the dais itself, simple and unadorned, set directly beside the newly repaired throne. "This seat is not a title," Salith said. "It carries no crown and no army, but it will remain beside the throne of the Kelvari dominion for as long as I rule, a reminder to every advisor, every general, and every future heir in this room that the measure of an ally is not what they demand of you, but what they give without demanding anything at all." She looked at me again, and this time there was no ceremony in her expression, just something quiet and grateful and entirely human, despite everything about her that was not. "Daniel Hartley of Earth," she said, "will you sit?" I do not remember walking up to that dais. I remember the weight of 41 empires watching me, the low murmur of translators working overtime, the faint smell of scorched metal still lingering from the shot that had melted the original golden chair. I remember sitting down beside her, feeling entirely out of place and entirely certain at the same time that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The Threll Emperor was the first to rise and incline his head toward us, a gesture of respect that, I would learn later, had not been offered to a species outside the 10 great empires in over a century. Others followed slowly, some clearly uncomfortable, some clearly reconsidering everything they thought they understood about rank and worth. Later that night, after the ceremony had finally ended and the exhausted delegations had scattered to their quarters, Salith found me on a balcony overlooking the palace gardens, staring out at unfamiliar stars scattered across an unfamiliar sky. "You could have run in that corridor," she said, joining me at the railing. When my cousin drew his weapon, you could have stepped back and let events unfold without you. No one would have blamed a diplomat from a minor species for staying out of a succession dispute. I didn't think about it that way. I said honestly, I just saw someone about to get hurt and I moved. That is precisely my point, Salith said. You did not calculate the political cost of involvement. You did not weigh alliances or ask what Earth might gain from saving a Kelvari heir. You simply acted, the same way you acted 4 months ago when you found me dying in that escape pod. Where I come from, we call that just being decent, I said. It's not supposed to be remarkable. Here, it is exceedingly rare, Salith said, and there was something almost sad in the way she said it. I have been surrounded my entire life by people who help only when helping serves them. Tonight, my own blood tried to kill me because keeping power served him better than honoring me. And a stranger from a species with no fleet, no empire, and no reason to care, put himself between me and a blade twice tonight without pausing to consider the cost. I did not have a clever answer for that. I just stood beside her, watching the strange stars, feeling the weight of a night that had started with quiet dread and somehow ended with me sitting beside a throne meant for one of the most powerful rulers in known space. You should know, Salith said after a while, that word of tonight will travel fast. 41 delegations witnessed an assassination attempt, a rescue, and a coronation all in the same evening. By morning, every court in known space will be asking who the human was who stopped a Dominion coup with nothing but quick thinking and an overturned table. That sounds exhausting, I said. It will be, she agreed, and for the first time that night, she actually smiled. But I suspect your species will handle the attention rather well. You seem remarkably unbothered by things that terrify everyone else in this galaxy. We've had a lot of practice being underestimated, I said. Turns out it's useful. Nobody expects the small species in the back row to catch the assassin. Salith laughed, quiet and genuine, and for a moment the exhaustion and danger of the night fell away entirely, leaving just 2 people standing on a balcony under a sky neither of us fully understood, both a little surprised by how the evening had turned out. There is an old saying among my people, she said eventually, that thrones are won by strength and kept by cunning. Tonight I learned something my ancestors never wrote down, that thrones are worth keeping only if you remember who stood beside you when strength and cunning both failed. She reached over and rested her hand briefly on the railing beside mine, not quite touching, but close enough that the gesture needed no explanation. Whatever comes next for my dominion, she said, there will always be a seat beside that throne. I would very much like you to consider it yours, whenever you choose to use it. I looked out at the gardens below, the strange trees swaying under an unfamiliar breeze, and thought about how far I was from home, and how strange it was that a summit meant to establish rank and power among 41 empires had ended instead with a simple truth that needed no translation. Kindness, offered without calculation, was worth more than any crown in that hall, and somewhere among the stars, an empire had just been reminded of it in the loudest and most dangerous way possible. I stayed on that balcony a long while after Salith left to attend to the business of her new reign, thinking about the seat waiting for me beside her throne, and about all the seats, back on Earth, that people offer each other every single day without ever once thinking to calculate the cost. Maybe that was the real difference between us and every empire in that hall. We had never needed a crown to understand that some things are simply worth doing, whether the galaxy is watching or not.